It's a Saturday morning in 1985, and you can smell the hot roast chicken at the Woolworth's lunch counter before you even reach the door. Downtown, where the parking meter still takes a single dime. Your mom has a long list, and the first stop is the hardware store, where the owner knows your dad by name and cuts a spare key while you spin the rack of penny candy. Zellers has the Zeddy bear grinning in the window, and up at the top of the street stands Eaton's, 4 floors tall, like it always has. You're certain it will be there forever? It will not. And what happened to it was not bad luck, and it was not the weather. We let it happen, one quiet decision at a time, because downtown was never really about buying things. It was the place a town turned into a town. Every town in this country had one. A single street where the whole place turned up on the same morning without a soul ever arranging it. You knew the man behind the meat counter, and he knew your order before you opened your mouth. The teenager bagging your groceries went to your school. Old men parked themselves on the bench outside the bank and watched the street go by like it was the best show on television. The shopkeeper would put it on your family's tab and let you settle up next week, because he knew your name and he knew you were good for it. He had watched you grow up from the other side of that counter. Going downtown was an event. You put on your decent clothes for it. The whole trip got planned around the layaway payment at Consumers Distributing, where you filled out a little pencil form, slid it across the counter, and a man disappeared into the back and came out carrying your item like magic. If you behaved, there was a banana split waiting at the end of it. None of this fell apart on its own. Somebody built the thing that was going to replace it, and the strangest part of the whole story is who that somebody turned out to be. In 1950, the first modern shopping center in Canada opened in West Vancouver. It was called Park Royal, anchored by a big Woolworths, with parking for 700 cars. For the very first time, you could turn your back on the street entirely and do all your shopping in one enclosed place built around the automobile. Then came the Giant. On February 26, 1964, Yorkdale opened just off the highway in Toronto on what had been open farmland the year before. It was the largest enclosed shopping mall on the planet at the time. 100,000 people poured through the doors on opening day. There were 6,500 parking spaces. And the company that dreamed the whole thing up and built it was Eaton's. Read that one more time. The department store that had anchored downtown for almost 100 years built the suburban box that would help hollow it out. The call was coming from inside the house. By 1981, the dream had gotten about as big as it could get. West Edmonton Mall opened its doors, and within a few years, it was the largest shopping mall in the entire world, a place with more parking than some towns had people. But the malls only softened downtown up. They did not finish it off. That job took an American giant that walked into this country already fully grown. On March 17, 1994, Walmart bought a struggling Canadian chain called Woolco and opened its first Canadian stores overnight. Not one store. 122 of them in a single stroke, with 16,000 employees inherited on day one. And here is the part almost nobody talks about. There were 22 more Woolco stores that Walmart could have taken, and it turned them down flat. The stores it walked away from were the ones that were either unionized or sitting in a downtown. Think about what that means. From its very first morning in this country, Walmart looked at our downtowns and said, no thanks. It wanted the edge of town, the cheap land out by the highway, the acres and acres of free parking. And it got every bit of it. Because the moment you climb into a car, downtown loses every single time. The old street was built for walking, for being local, for running into your neighbor outside the bakery on a Tuesday. The big box wanted only the parking lot, and all those dollars people spent did not multiply into anything. They simply moved. Out of the core, onto the ring road, into a windowless gray building with one name bolted over the door. The shoppers left first, then the property taxes followed them out to the edge, and the storefronts your grandparents had built, brick by brick, started going dark. And it did not stop with one Walmart on the edge of one town. Through the 1990s and into the 2000s, the enclosed mall itself gave way to something even hungrier: the Power Center. A long strip of giant boxes lined up along the highway, a Walmart at one end and a warehouse grocery at the other, wrapped in a parking lot the size of an airfield. Town councils kept waving them through, one approval after another, because the new jobs and the fresh tax assessment always looked good on a page. Nobody ever wrote the cost of the dying core on that same page. So the core kept right on dying, quietly, while the ribbon got cut out by the off-ramp. One by one, the giants that had held our downtowns together for generations began to topple, and the very first to go had a name that every single Canadian alive knew by heart. Eaton's opened its doors in 1869. For 130 years, it was the beating heart of Main Street in nearly every Canadian city. It ran the Santa Claus Parade starting in 1904. For decades, it mailed out the famous catalog, the wish book that rural families ordered their whole lives from, right up until that catalog finally shut down in 1976. And then the store itself started to bleed. In 1997, Eaton's filed for court protection and closed 21 stores, throwing 2,000 people out of work. It hung on for 2 more years. Then, on August 20th, 1999, it filed for bankruptcy for the very last time. 64 stores and 13,000 jobs left twisting in the wind. By 2002, the name that had shaped how Canada shopped for 133 years was simply gone. And the cruelest twist of the whole thing is still standing in downtown Toronto right now: the Eaton Centre, a massive enclosed mall that Eaton's itself built back in 1977, put up right on top of the very first store Timothy Eaton ever opened. Today, it pulls in tens of millions of visitors a year, thriving and packed and busy, selling everything on earth except Eaton's. Behind all of those cold numbers were people who just wanted one ordinary Saturday back. In August of 1999, a couple from Thunder Bay, Jim Pohl and Nicole Pelletier, drove to the downtown Montreal Eaton's the day before their wedding to pick up the groom's suit. $1,000 suit, already paid for, already tailored to fit him. They got to the store and found the doors locked shut. A security guard stood on the other side of the glass and would not let them in. That was it. No warning, no phone call, no apology. The doors just closed. And that is exactly how it felt in town after town after town. The anchor at the top of the street went dark, and everything downhill from it went dark soon after. Simpson's had already been swallowed by the Bay years earlier, its name scrubbed off the buildings by the early 1990s. Consumers Distributing, where half the country did its Christmas shopping out of that little paper catalog, closed for good in 1996. Zellers, with the Zeddy bear and the promise that the lowest price was the law, handed its store leases over to Target in 2011 and vanished inside of 2 years. The shops that made downtown worth the drive left one after another, and most of them never went bankrupt in some dramatic crash. They just walked out to the highway, where the rent was cheaper and the parking never cost a dime. In Winnipeg, they tore the old Eaton's building down to the ground and put a hockey arena up in its place. They saved the original red bricks and set them carefully into the new wall. A little memorial, the old store's headstone, standing quietly in the lobby of the very thing that replaced it. You would think that was rock bottom. It was not. Because then the internet showed up and finished off whatever the parking lot had started. The last holdouts on Main Street were always the specialists, the record shop and the bookstore, the camera store, the family hardware place that had been there for 40 years. They had lived through the malls and even through Walmart, but they could not live through a warehouse parked on the edge of a city that never once closed its doors and undercut them on every single thing they sold. Even the malls themselves began to die off. And Sears Canada, the very company that had picked over Eaton's bones back in 1999, collapsed completely in 2018 and shut every last store it had left. So walk down a whole lot of Canadian main streets today and just count up what's left. A vape shop, a payday loan place with steel bars over the window, a dollar store, an empty nail salon, 3 boarded up storefronts in a row, and a Tim Hortons. And somewhere in that sad little stretch, there's a shop front where your own family once had their Saturday. A blank plastic sign over a locked door, right where the hardware store used to be, where the owner knew your dad's name and cut that spare key while you spun the candy rack by the till. That empty pane of glass tells you everything. It is what a town looks like when 1,000 tiny decisions all go the wrong way, made by people who never once had to live on that street. The elderly woman who used to walk downtown every morning for her fresh bread stays home now. The kid who would have landed a first Saturday job behind a counter has nowhere left to even apply. And the place where a whole town used to gather without anybody arranging, it is now a parking lot 2 miles out of town, with a greeter standing at the door. We told ourselves the whole time that it was progress. Cheaper prices, easier parking, everything you needed under one enormous roof. And maybe some of it truly was, but we quietly handed over the middle of our towns to get it, and nobody ever stopped to ask us if that trade was really worth making. So do you remember your downtown? The store? The smell? The one Saturday you would give anything to walk back into? Tell us in the comments the town you grew up in and the shop you miss the most. If you know someone who walked that very same street, share this with them. And subscribe so that together we can keep these stories alive while there are still people around who live them.